The Professor's Digital Dojo.
Alright guys, welcome back for another quick tutorial. I had a couple of questions from a few people about working with mesh lights, so I think we're going to work with a very simple scene just so that we can see how mesh lights work. Alright, so I'll build something up here that's pretty simple, not a lot of complex geometry, etc., so that we can just kind of focus on mesh lights themselves. So I'm going to create a polygon prim plane here, and let me go and really set this back to 1 and 1, and let's create. Now that's done. Let's just scale that up a bit here. Alright, I'm just scale it to grid size, and we'll create, let's just do like a polygon primitive cube. And as you guys know, I'm cuckoo for my bevels, so anytime I create geometry like this, I am going to create a bit, just a small bit of poly bevel. There we go, so that it reacts well when we interact with light. This will also help us to see kind of how the reflections and things work from our mesh light, and I'll also create a polygon primitive sphere. And remember, we're always going to do that, say always 99.9% of the time, we're going to do this from a polyplatonic solid and an isocohedron, and we'll just push it up to 3 sub-Ds, 3 subdivisions. I'm going to intersect these two, just like I said, we're keeping the scene simple, and just kind of create something visually a little bit interesting. I don't know. I mean, it's not terribly interesting. It's all right. I think like that. All right. So we've got our scene here. I will give our plane a AI standard surface material. I'm going to leave the roughness pretty low. I was thinking about 0.32, so we've still got some reflectivity. And I will give this an AI standard surface material. I'll bring this down to kind of a dark gray. We'll make this a very sort of rough, what's known in old terminology as a Lambert material, so not super shiny. And then we'll give our cube an AI standard surface material. Now you'll notice I'm really not naming these right now in our shader, and that's simply because this is a pretty fast and easy tutorial, simply focusing on mesh lights. It won't stop my OCD from me mucking about with this nonetheless. Don't know why that is, but it is. I'm a weirdo, and it's okay to be weird. In fact, I'll give this one a bit of a color. Let's go with a nice sort of golden color here. Now, right now we have no lights in the scene. I'm not going to even put a light. We're going to light the entire scene with some mesh lights. Before we go too far, though, I do want to kind of give a warning that mesh lights are complicated to render. They are something that the render engine really has to consider hard. What that means is we generally will get a beautiful lighting scenario, give ourselves a nice composition here. We get ourselves a nice beautiful lighting scenario out of a mesh light. However, we are not going to get a simple lighting scenario. What that means is we will have to go with some pretty high sample rates if all we're using is mesh lights. But you know what? Enough of that. Let's just go on to it. I'm going to create a poly primitive sphere. That'll be our first mesh light here. Again, polyplatonic solid. Let's just lift that kind of up right here. And again, let's make that spherical. And I'll scale this up just a tiny bit. And we'll move it around the scene just to see how it looks in the render. But I want you to look at a few things. We've got our polyplane here in our outliner. We've got our polyprimitive cube, and we have our polyplatonic solid sphere right here. And then our final polyplatonic solid right here is going to be our mesh light. Now the reason I want you to pay attention in here is the moment we turn this mesh into a Arnold mesh light, you'll notice some more parameters appear here in the outliner. The thing you have to also keep in mind, only polygon primitives can be turned into mesh lights. We can create NURB surfaces, non-uniform rational B-splines, and other surfaces. However, we'd have to convert them to polygons before we'd able to convert them into mesh lights. So once you have your primitive selected, whatever it is, whatever shape it is, doesn't matter. It's all good as long as it's a polygon. We'll come up here to the Arnold menu, and if you can't find it, basically it's no matter which module we're in, you'll always have this Arnold menu here. I'm in the rendering module since that's the work we're going to be doing. There we go. So we're going to click on Arnold, Lights, and Mesh Light. Now that I've done that, you'll see that that polyplatonic solid has a plus sign next to it. That means I can open this plus sign, and you'll see that in the drop down, its subsurface is now a polyplatonic mesh light. Once that mesh light's created, here in our attribute editor, we've got a few things that we need to go through. So the first thing is, as I've told you guys before, generally when we're working with lights of any sort, mesh lights or otherwise, intensity will always stay at 1, and we're going to set the brightness of our light based on our exposure. Before I even set that though, I just kind of want to go through and look at a few other things. If I'd like to see this light in the scene, I will want to tick the box that says light is visible. I'll then put my minimum samples for a mesh light at around 4. Now you'll see that we can do a few other things here, but right now we're just going to stick with the sort of meat and potatoes of the mesh light. So I'm going to put this exposure up to about, let's say we'll start at 8, and let's just pull a quick render and see what we've got going on here in this scene. Alright, and get rid of these snapshots. Oh, by the way, I hope you guys liked my new opening. I know it's cheesy. I wanted to do this super cheesy 80s kind of opening for the video, so I just spent about 20 minutes in the studio making that. Alright, here we go. So let's render. And there you go. You can see that this sphere, and I'll kind of put this, let's put this where we can all see it, so I can work and we can watch the render in real time. And you'll notice if I move the light around, of course it changes the lighting scenario. The closer it is, the brighter. Mesh lights generally give pretty soft shadows. That's quite nice about them. And there you go. So that's pretty simple setup for a mesh light. It's not all we can do, but this is kind of nice. And what's great about it is we can animate this light if we needed to. But let's look at another scenario. So I'm going to stop that. Let's delete this from our scene. Notice I deleted it, and the original polygon mesh, let's minimize that, is still here, that polyplatonic solid. So I'm going to delete that too. Next, let's create a polyprimitive torus. Here we go. And I'm going to kind of surround my scene with this. Let's tweak these attributes a bit. I definitely want this torus to be nice and round. We're going to play with the section radius so it tightens it up like this, and then I'll probably give it about 80 like that. So sort of this giant toroid hula hoop surrounding our scene like so. Alright, and now let's do this again. We're going to convert this into a Arnold mesh light, and I want you to notice here that we'll get a new parameter the moment I go to Arnold, Lights, Mesh Light. And you'll see, if I open up this torus, we'll see that it now has a node attached to it that creates a mesh light out of it. So we'll set this exposure again, starting at about 8. We'll do light visible. I want to see it. I'm going to put these up to about 4. And I'm actually going to turn on color temperature for this one. We're going to bring it down and warm things up just a little bit. And then if I pull our render window back up, you'll get to see this mesh light in action. There we go. Give it a second. Boom. And there you go. This is one of the reasons mesh lights are really cool, because I can have a lot of fun with it. So say I can set a keyframe, and then over the course of maybe, I don't know, 120 frames, I can have this light sort of rotating around the scene. Like so. And I know we won't see the render in real time, but if we hit play, you can see that mesh lights allow us to do some pretty cool effects here in Arnold, our render engine. That's the basics of it. Let's tweak this shader a little bit, and let's pull that roughness down so it's a little shinier, and you'll see it starts to pick up the reflection from the mesh light. Same thing in here. So mesh lights are geometry, they're also light, and again, if I wanted to get a little bit of glow out of this, I could open up my post-processing box here in my Arnold render view, like so, and I can add an imager known as a lens effects imager, and then I'll tweak the strength up a little bit. And if it's too bright like that, you can do one of two things. You can pull the strength down until you're just getting a little bit of glow, maybe like that. I can also play with the threshold. That tells it how bright things should be in the scene before they glow. And I can pull the radius down. So right now we've got a radius of like 4 pixel glow. I can go 3, 2, 1. Usually for just a little bit of glow, I'm going to put my radius at 2, and I will play with this strength until I find a nice balance that's not overglowing. I think maybe 0.25 will give me kind of what I want. Still a little too bright. Let's go 0.2. 0.16. There you go. That for me is enough glow just for this shot. You may want more or less glow depending on what you're doing. Nonetheless, quick, dirty, easy, simple. This is the Arnold mesh light. We can have multiples in our scene. However, we do want to be aware that the more we put in our scene, the more render power we're going to take, the more samples it'll take to get a nice, clean, noise-free render. And then we want to keep good track of these. I noticed there were a few people who were trying to kind of maybe do something that seems instinctually correct, and that's Control D to duplicate their mesh light. It doesn't really work that way. Notice I just made a copy of the light. I can copy my polyphotonic solid here, and then it will duplicate the mesh light. I have to go to the top of what's known as the hierarchy for that to happen though, and you'll see though there's nothing here. And that's because of the way mesh lights work. If I want to sort of make a new mesh light, what I'm going to do is I can, I can go to the top of the hierarchy, meaning I don't want to select this in the viewport because it will grab the mesh light itself. I would like to grab the torus itself, and instead of Control D to duplicate, what we're going to do is we're going to copy paste, and that works to duplicate a mesh light. We'll create a new group that way. So I'll hit Control C to copy, and then I'll hit Control V to paste, and you'll see that a new group has appeared in here. And if I were to expand that group out, you'll see that indeed I have copied my mesh light, and we could render that no problem. In fact, I have the render going down here, so there you go. You can see that we've got our mesh lights rendered. I can adjust the exposure on this second mesh light, not a problem. I can say, you know what, I want this one to be a little bit dimmer than the other one. Let that render go. Or a lot dimmer than the other one. There we go. So, and I can change the color temperature of it if I want. So I want it maybe a bit cooler. I can bring that brightness back up. And so we've got 2 mesh lights in the same scene. I can have 1,000 mesh lights. I wouldn't suggest that really. Things like Unreal Engine handle that really well. Arnold's not quite designed for that sort of work, but that is the basics of mesh lights. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments or email me. I'll be glad to tweak this tutorial if you need some more information. And remember to like and subscribe. Hopefully this is pretty helpful for you guys. All right, see you around.